So next we're going to cover how to route things in the board. So when you start a new show, you always want to start from the default. You want to reboot the board and initialize it so everything is back to its default state. And the way that that's set up is what we call one-to-one, which means basically input 1 on the back of the board corresponds with input 1 on the actual channels on the board, and so on. That's called one-to-one. Usually that's good for what we want to do, but if you ever want to change how things are routed, or you have like multiple stage boxes you need to adapt for your show, we're going to kind of cover how to do that. So on this screen, you can see we're going to look at the input section, which is you hit this routing button over here. The first thing that pops up is your input section. So these top numbers up here correspond to the actual banks of faders on the board physically, and then all of these options here are what are going to feed those banks. So you can only move them in blocks of 8. And the way that this works is you just dial this sucker down. So for whatever reason, maybe we want to channels 9 through 16 to be fed by the local inputs 1 through 8, which would be a little weird, but maybe we got, all our drums patched in, but we want to move the drums over to another section over here. So you just go up, click on local 1 through 8. And now we have channels 1 through 8 on the back of the board, routed to the physical faders 9 through 16 on here. The other thing we'll use is the AES, which we'll cover in another video. That's for use with the stage box. But that's pretty much it for inputs. So as long as you remember these guys up here are the physical blocks on the actual board, and these are what you're going to route to them, that's pretty much all you got to know. You can see they're already set up, so local 1 through 8, local just meaning that physical inputs in the back of the board, going into faders 1 through 8, local 9 through 16, faders 9 through 16, bibbity bobbity bacon. So there's a few other input patching. There's AES, which we'll do in another video. There's a card, which we won't worry about because we don't ever use that. And then XLR outputs, don't worry about that either. The next section is the routing out. This is pretty important to be able to figure out how it works. It's pretty straightforward. So over on the side, we have our analog outputs, and those are the physical XLR outputs on the back of the board. You can see we have outputs 1 through 16 because there's 16 physical outs. And as I scroll through them, you can see that the signal is changing. So they're pretty much set up 1-to-1 for the most part. So output 1 is mix 1, output 2 is mix 2, and so on, until we get to the last two outputs, 15 and 16. So 15 and 16 are set default to be the master out. Main left, main right, you can see that changing. And then usually the other thing that I will change, I'll go to output number 14. And if we have front fills set up, I'll make that one of my front fills, which usually will feed from a matrix that you remember from the other video. So we can select matrix and select matrix 1. So now we have matrix 1, which will come after the stereo fader. That'll be feeding output number 14, which is the physical output on the back of the board, and we'll plug that into the amp that's powering our front fills. The other thing that I'll usually do, output 13, you don't have to do it this way, but I like to keep it consistent amongst the shows. It makes it easier for everybody. So output 13 will be our subwoofer, and usually we'll feed that from either the mono center channel, or you can feed it from a bus. The reason that we do that is because there's only a couple things that you really want to send to the subwoofer, because only a couple instruments actually get down into that register. So like kick drums will go there, bass guitars or bass synths, and that's pretty much it. You don't really want anything else going to the subwoofer. It'll make it kind of muddy and not sound very good. So output 13, we're going to change that to the mono center channel. This is how it's set up in the loft in the stage room, and usually how we'll set it up for shows. So now anything I send to that main mono center channel will get routed over to output number 13 in the back of the board. And then output 13, we're going to plug into our subwoofer amplifier that's going to power all of those subs. That's pretty much it as far as output. There's some additional features we won't cover because it's going to get too complicated. So we're just covering the basics, and then once you got those down, you can delve into all this stuff. Auxilary outs are your 6 quarter-inch outputs out of the back of the board, and you can send a variety of stuff to those the same way that we just talked about on the other page. And these other 2 tabs, don't even worry about that. And that's about it for routing. So if anything funky is ever happening on your board, you're not getting signal where you think you should get it, go to your routing section and just check, make sure it's patched the way that you think it should be patched, and always set it to default whenever you start a new show.